Welcome, good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's conversation, Leading with Inclusion, a New Lens on Merit. My name is Shira Bornstein. I serve as the VP of Engagement at YW Boston. I really want to extend a warm welcome to those of you who are longtime members of our community. And to those of you who are connecting with YW Boston for the first time, welcome. YW Boston is part of the national YWCA network. We all share the same mission, eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. Each local affiliate implements the mission very autonomously based on the needs of their local communities. Here in Boston, we're focused on creating workplaces and a city where people of color, women, and particularly women of color can thrive. We offer training and consulting services, leadership development, youth development, and practice advocacy. Today's webinar is part of our Leading with Inclusion series, an ongoing initiative designed to provide diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals and their colleagues with the insights, inspiration, and practical solutions needed to navigate diversity and inclusion challenges in today's rapidly changing environment. It's my true honor to introduce YW Boston's new president and CEO, Abba Taylor. Abba joined us about 2 months ago now. Over the last 25 years, Abba has engaged in social justice work as an educator, facilitator, organizer, consultant, nonprofit executive, and board member. Passionate about arts, culture, and creative expression, Abba describes herself as a closeted writer and a very out sci-fi nerd. She brings a sense of authenticity and humor that I hope you'll get to experience during today's webinar. Off to you, Abba.
Thank you, Shira. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited. As Shira said, I've been on the job for a little less than 2 months. And so this is absolutely, if nothing else, one of the highlights of my tenure here at YW. And I'm excited to jump in. I want to give a little framing for our conversation today. So as we know, for the last several years, the state of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, has continued to come under increasing scrutiny, with DEI initiatives across all sectors facing not only political, but also cultural resistance. This includes potential legislative challenges such as HR 8706, otherwise known as the Dismantle DEI Act of 2024, and a slew of other executive actions attempting to roll back the progress. However, we know that DEI work has not only been at play for decades under different names, so it must continue and it will continue. As part of our Leading with Inclusion webinar series, we want to bring together and highlight DEI experts who can share actionable strategies to help CEOs, DEI leaders, and their colleagues navigate the turbulent times and continue driving inclusive leadership and workplace diversity. Part of that work is helping leaders feel equipped with the tools they need to navigate conversations that may be in the headlines or in their workplaces and respond to questions and challenges from constituents, and also feel confident in shaping the narrative and continuing the work. So like I said, this is a really special moment for me. Vernā Myers has been a hero of mine. For anyone who's ever heard me do a DEI training or workshop, I'm often quoting her. So I am really, really excited to welcome our guest. I feel like I could probably spend 30 minutes giving your bio, Vernā. So I'm gonna let you introduce yourself. Vernā is founder and president of the Vernā Myers Company, and just an overall rock star, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. So I'm going to pass it to you in a second. Before I do that, I want to let folks know that I do have some scripted questions that Vernā and I have already spoken through, and I anticipate this will be this will evolve into a relaxed and informal conversation, because that's how I show up today. We are encouraging folks to ask questions throughout the conversation. My colleagues on the team behind the scenes will be vetting those questions and sharing them with us. So we'll make sure we have time for a Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them, and we will get started. So thank you, Vernā, for joining us.
Thank you, Ava. I am so happy to be here. First and foremost, I love the YW, and you see, I have worn the
I
color.
know
I
you have.
and have a long relationship with the YW and the board, and really subscribe and support its mission. And so thank you for having me. It's also nice to be in what I think is probably a lot of Boston sort of company, which of course I miss. Some of you may know, or some of you may not, that I lived in Boston for at least 35 years. And so very familiar with the work of YW. And also, I would say that by way of introduction, people are calling me a pioneer. I sort of feel, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I feel like I'm in a covered wagon crossing the West with that.
I love
With
it.
that label, but I am grateful to have been part of the beginning. And by the way, there are pioneers that go way before me, at least 10 to 15 years, from whom I learned the work. But grateful to be here. As you know, I have a company that does high-level consulting with leaders, and I keynote, etc. But I'm just grateful to be here with you to have this conversation, and with all the guests who have joined us.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing the beautiful weather as well. I think I saw in a comment that this is a beautiful day to have a beautiful conversation. So, okay, so let's just dive in. Let's start with the acronym DEI. You know, it's a three-letter word that has a lot of heaviness right now. But I would welcome you to start by just defining some of these key terms. We've had lots of conversations, even at YW, about what do we mean by diversity, equity, inclusion? Is that something we want to continue saying? Do we want to say DEI? Do we want to say something else? So let's just explore, what does that even mean, diversity, equity, inclusion? And also, what is meritocracy?
Well, let me just say, I teach entire workshops about these definitions, but if I wanted to do something fairly quickly, I would say that diversity is really about a variety, a mix of culture, experience, and identities, both the commonalities and also differences between those groups. I would say that inclusion really is, I often say, about having an environment where people feel that they're expected, that they're reflected, and that they're also respected. And equity is how we get there. And that is to balance the unlevel playing field. Now, I actually didn't understand, and I have been at the work, so I've been watching different words being sort of added, right? So it was diversity. Oh, before that, when people say, should we rebrand diversity? I'm like, we already rebranded it like 4 times, right?
Right, exactly.
Often just to make people feel more comfortable. But before, it was affirmative action. It was respect. It was tolerance. People old enough like me to know that it was tolerance, and diversity was like an attempt to talk about the strength and to talk about the excitement and the innovation and the reality of the demographics that the workplace was facing. But I really didn't understand the difference between diversity and inclusion until, and I tell this story a lot, going to an alumni event at Harvard Law School, where I went to law school, and hearing the first class of women, 1953, talk about how when they got to the campus, there were no bathrooms for the women. And it just dawned on me, okay, all this work, all this arguing, all these years, they finally decide to let women into the law school, but they don't remember the bathrooms for the women. And the women sort of said, hey, look, we're happy to be here.
Right.
We don't want to make trouble, but where are we going to relieve ourselves? And so, they sort of reluctantly put a toilet in the basement of Austin Hall, which is a building on the campus, in the room for the custodians. And I thought to myself, okay, in 1953, maybe Harvard Law School could say that they had gender diversity, but they could not say they had gender inclusion.
Absolutely.
And that's a huge distinction. And it's the distinction that I saw happening in law firms, which were where I first started, where people were coming in. We were doing a lot to bring people in and change the mix of identity, experience, and culture, but not understanding what needed to happen to create a conducive environment. And so what equity looks like in that situation is that you put the bathrooms in. And that may mean you need to break up a floor or two, or you need to change something, but also equity is about that process.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you listening? Are you inviting voices? Who did you consult? All you gotta do is invite us for breakfast before we came, and in no time we'd be like, excuse me,
Right.
where's your restroom?
Right.
So those are the large concepts that have been moving the workplace forward. And so of course the mess that we're in right now is incredibly troubling, but it is also something, as you said at the beginning, that we must continue.
I love that. That bathroom analogy is perfect. And your one of your most famous quotes, people can Google it, it's the diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And again, anyone who's heard me give a training, I've sort of done the remix of that, saying, well, diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being able to play the music that you like, right? Because you can come into the Harvard Law School bathroom, off spaces, but if there are no bathrooms to use, what's the point? So thinking about inclusion as being able to be part of the space, right?
Yes, yes.
And for me, equity is about being on the planning party, right? Like being able to be at the decision-making table, thinking about ways in which everybody can be participants, not just sort of passively present.
Exactly. And people are making reference to Hidden Figures. I see that where Taraji did an incredible monologue about the bathrooms. But yeah, very similar. And then you also asked about meritocracy.
Yes.
And, what's interesting is that meritocracy has this whole history from way back, which was a critique of the aristocracy, of the oligarchy, and the presumption of their competence and capability based on their backgrounds. So it was like they were perceived to be meritocratic because of where they came from. And that was very much about class and a lot about exclusion of all others. Nowadays, we really talk about meritocracy as being that people are getting what they deserve, that their capabilities and their talent is what we use to figure out whether they should be hired or promoted, or whether they should, or what kind of performance evaluations they deserve. And that, I think, is a really good thing. I feel like almost everybody is into merit. I think almost everyone believes that the fair thing to do is to award and reward people based on their competencies.
Right.
We don't have a meritocracy right now in our country and in most of our workplaces. There may be segments and situations that are meritocratic, but the work of DEI is to allow for meritocracy to thrive. It is a thing that was created once we were willing as a country to acknowledge that there was inequity, right? And then we passed we passed the Title VII law and the Civil Rights Law in 1964. And that was about making sure that we had a legal basis for insisting on meritocracy.
Right, right, right. Absolutely. And I love, I think this is, one of the key kind of issues of the moment right now when we are talking about DEI, because there is this misconception that DEI is somehow absent of meritocracy, or, just simply put, people with credentials, people with the skills, people with the right knowledge and tools, right? And I always want to push back and remind folks that, there are a lot of people with credentials who aren't getting the doors open. And that's exactly what part of the DEI work is. It's not about cherry picking or, tokenism, which I think is what people assume and sort of make this false binary. So I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about some of the misconceptions that folks may have between around the relationship between DEI and merit. And, if you'd like to speak to some of the historical factors that created the structural and historical factors that created this misunderstanding around DEI.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I am not a fan of MEI, not because I don't believe in meritocracy and excellence and intelligence, all good things, but you cannot get to MEI without DEI.
Mm-hmm.
I really believe you cannot have merit unless you have equality. You cannot have equality unless you have equity, because the truth is we haven't quite leveled out the playing field. There is still exclusion, there is still bias, there is still a lack of networking with the talent that is out there, which means that when companies really work to expand and pull in people from so many different places, they're doing that because they know they need that talent. They need the perspectives, they need the experiences, and they need the specific capabilities if they want to future-proof their company, if they want to be profitable, if they want to be on the cutting edge, if they want to have innovation. And so the work of merit is the work of expanding, not contracting.
Mm.
And that's the thing that people so many times in so many ways in our country, right? You want to go to the club that's exclusive, right? That's how we decide what merit is. We want to go to the school that only one out of every blah, blah, blah can get into. And we have falsely equated exclusion with excellence.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
And
say that one more time, Vernā. Say that one more time.
Right? We believe that somehow if it's exclusive, it's better. But I'm going to tell you that we've got a lot of exclusive clubs that are not better, that do not represent what we say are our core values around integrity and honesty and collaboration and respect and inclusion and excellence. Because you can have, when people keep trying to take the D out, I'm like, look, we've already had homogeneity. We already know that can only get us but so far. We also know it doesn't take much in order to include people who are just the same.
Right.
Although as humans, we do find ways to figure out how we're not the same and how to treat people badly, no matter what. But it is so important for us to recognize that there is so much we're missing. I'll give you one example, right? So I don't know how many people watched Sinners this weekend or last weekend, right? This is the newest film out by the same person who did
Black Panther, Ryan Coogler.
Ryan Coogler. And I mean, I'm not going to ruin it for those of you who
haven't seen it yet, so don't ruin it.
But there are so many stories that have never been told.
And
so you know that I was the inaugural head of inclusion for Netflix, and I learned a lot about the entertainment world being there for 5 years. And one of the things that we learned by diversity, inclusion, and equity is there's so many stories that have never been told. There is so much authenticity that still needs to be integrated into our storytelling. There's so much talent that we haven't laid eyes on. And when we do, and when it's something fresh and new and unexpected, because it's coming from the diversity, we all benefit. We can see it. We know that it is new and that it is worth paying attention to. And so what I'm really trying to do by giving that example is to suggest to people who is missing, whose voices are we not hearing, whose talent are we not having access to. And that's what every company or organization with any constituency or stakeholders have to be thinking about if they want to continue to be successful.
That's exactly right. And that was actually what I was just about to mention, is that I think that has actually been the business case for diversity, equity, inclusion work for 20 or 30 years, right? Deepening, widening the talent pool, and knowing that homogeneity is only going to get you so far. So I also think about the fact that the country that we live in is diverse, and there's nothing we can do about that, right? And so being able to reflect the context that you're in only strengthens your workplace, where have you. So that's a really great point. And on that note, I'm curious to go a little bit more specific, because as you know, YW Boston, our focus is on women, people of color, and especially specifically women of color, really wanting to uplift the talent, the contributions that folks from those categories can make. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit about any sort of unique ways that you see DEI initiatives kind of interacting or intersecting with merit to create conditions for women of color to really thrive.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing that I also think confuses people, Aba. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm trying to say all the words these
I know.
days, right? What they don't recognize is where the obstacles are.
Mm.
And if you don't understand the obstacles, if you don't understand both the obstacles that are interpersonal or personal biases, or organizational biases that are built in, that are not necessarily even intentional. It's just how things have been done. But things that have been done are sort of like the Harvard example. They created a law school that was based on a certain type of student. And therefore, in order to move into the future, they had to rethink and reshape that organization to reflect the new folks who were coming in. Likewise, what I am seeing is that people don't recognize that they created something that was exclusive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, like a lot of companies would say to me, like, we really get that, we understand that, but yeah, we don't want to change. What we've been doing has been great. We've really done well. So why would we change? Like, they want difference, but they don't want to be different.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I notice is that people are like, well, why are we doing something special for women of color? Like, why would, that's not fair.
Mm.
And I can agree with them to a point until I take them up to look at what is also unfair.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Which is that women, for example, I mean, the Fearless Fund was just a very horrible situation where the Fearless Fund that creates funding for women of color, Black women, get less than 0.35% of all the equity funding there is. The Fearless Fund is offering a $20,000 scholarship, just $20,000, and Ed Bloom went after it. And so what we have to recognize is that women of color, Black women, Hispanic women, trans women, there are individual groups that have to experience obstacles because people are unaware still. They disrespect and undervalue these groups. They don't understand their contributions. They have biases against women, or women have particular responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And usually those responsibilities, often financial, are even more so for women who are Black or who have a lot of obligations or a lot of well, I was going to say law debt, but even all sorts of debt. We're not just talking about law firms. And so we need to find the ways to bridge that gap. That's what equity is about. And so that might look like an internship. That might look like organizations that are introducing, I saw this fabulous a commercial of these Black Girls Cook, it's called. Black Girls Cook, right? And it's like these teenage girls who are being taught by other Black women about how to not only cook, but they're rethinking their careers, right? And they're seeing real possibilities and they're creating things. And why is that important? Because there are very few chefs who are women or women of color. And so if we really want to invite individual talent into environments that have been closed off to them, we need to do something active, something proactive. And so that's the kind of, or if you're doing mentorship, like I really defy anyone to tell me that they have been successful without mentors. They may have been informal mentors. And the studies suggest that women, generally, women of color more so, have a difficult time with cultivating informal mentoring relationships that are so essential. Maybe not at the very beginning, maybe not even in the middle. But if you want to continue to progress in most organizations, you have to have someone who's investing in you, who's sponsoring you, who's mentoring you, helping you to understand how to navigate, what to say, what not to say, all of that. Why not actually make sure that if there is a deficit in that situation, that is informal mentoring, and we know it's crucial to people's success, then maybe we're going to do something specific for the group that has been ignored, undervalued, not actually able to access the same things that others have.
Absolutely. This also reminds me of John Powell's work around targeted universalism, right? And I was at a Boston Business Journal event a couple of weeks ago and talking to a journalist about the curb cut effect, right? And the fact that before, the ADA, there were just curbs and folks with disabilities, particularly using wheelchairs, like had trouble, getting down. And so the simplest act of being able to focus on a particular group with their needs, creating curb cuts, now everybody uses them, cyclists, people with strollers, and everyone. And so this idea that, if you are creating more access, it can actually benefit everyone, right? And so you start by those who are most marginalized or affected. I know we're running out of time before we open up, so I'm going to try to squeeze in a few more questions. You are writing a book, and I wanted to give an opportunity for you to talk a little bit about that. And we discussed during our prep that you're really trying to be thoughtful around the criticisms and open to the criticisms. And I think that's a really important approach as well. We're not going to sit here and pretend that all DEI, as is sort of uniformly done the same way. I'm of the opinion that, as you were saying, any sort of DEI work really is about change, ultimately changing institutions, changing systems, making them more equitable. So what do you say to some of the legitimate criticisms of DEI and how they may be at odds with this concept of merit?
I guess the first thing I say is that's not what's happening right now. So the attack against DEI is not about the practice. It's about really exploiting people's fears about where their life is going or how they think about their culture, and using that to polarize each other and polarize our environments and fight against each other. So first and foremost, I just want folks to know that that whole thing is illegitimate. Right? This idea there's illegal DEI, that is actually not true, and that some people are being disadvantaged. We can talk about the statistics on that. But I'm also thinking this is an opportunity. They say never waste a crisis. So the opportunity opportunity is to think about how to strengthen and fortify the work and to figure out what we could do that really invites all the people,
All
because
people.
that's all of DEI is about. It has always wanted to make a space for all people. And so I have been thinking about blame, shame, and attack, which is where our country is right now. And how do we move from hate, from anger, from polarization, from perceiving some as better and some as less? And I do know that when people start to find out the history of the country or the ways in which things have been slanted to one group, or the supremacy that some groups feel, like when they become aware of that, sometimes it's very painful and it's destabilizing. Could we be more compassionate about how destabilizing it is to realize that the world that you thought you were living in is actually not, that there are actually privileges, and those privileges have been embedded and baked into all sorts of structures that have made your life a little bit easier. And by the way, all of us have some privileges, by the way. And so all of us need to do that work. So it's not like the better people and the not as good people. I'm really looking for people who want better for all people. And so that's what the book is about.
Love it. Love it. In terms of strategies, as you spoke about, I think it's very real, and you hit the nail on the head around what the real assault on DEI work is really about, right? To me, it's about keeping those doors closed as much as possible. Again, that exclusive approach to our reality. What do you think are some strategies that could be effective in engaging folks who are skeptical, or, needing a little bit more of that nuanced conversation about the state of the world?
Yeah. There are two things that I've been thinking about. One is feelings are different than data. Okay, so you got feelings. Maybe there are a few people who've been feeling excluded. And I say few because when I'm looking at statistics, a couple of 2024 studies are showing that 75% of US workers, I'm going to read this, believe that helping their employers fight racism and injustice is a good thing. And 80% say it's important for their company to be an inclusive organization. That's from Pew Research also. And that 56% of US workers are good on even increasing DEI work in their workplace. So we've got the feelings that maybe some people have that they've been excluded, but we also have data that suggests, and again, I'll take a look at my notes, that the organization, the Equality Center, Equality Action Center, that is run by Joan Williams, and I'm on the board. What we discovered by doing a number of research programs, that often white men are 91 to 94% happy with the opportunities that they have at work. They believe they're on the right path. They believe they have access to meaningful opportunities. So who's being disadvantaged?
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think communication includes acknowledging feelings. Okay, so you feel this way, tell me why. And being really genuine with listening and inviting, because there could be ways that you're executing that is causing that sense or that feeling, but also data. You got to show people the data.
Yep.
Right? Because you might be having that experience, but generally, the workplace is for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those same studies suggest that they understand that their company is better and their culture is better as a result.
Absolutely. I mean, undoubtedly, using data to fight back against misinformation is so critical. And that narrative, I think we recognize that sometimes media or whatever, we can be inclined to look at the minority of organizations who are pulling back, who are, shutting down, but there is an overwhelming majority of companies and organizations that are still committed to doing this work, and so to be able to show the data is really important and really strategic in this moment. And I love how you mentioned the element of feelings, because I think feelings, in fact, often do get conflated. And it's important to make the distinction between the two and to really address the feelings, the legitimate feelings that people may have. I also wanted to mention that we, of course, talk about race, women of color, but DEI is about, it's gender, it's ability, it's veterans, it's all, there's such a wide spectrum. And I think I've seen something posted circulating, I think you reposted on social media, like if people really understand the breadth of inclusion that DEI work, actually does. It's not just about giving Black people privileges that other folks don't get. It's like bringing everyone in. And I think that's another really important element to remember.
So important. I think if people understood DEI, they would be rallying for it, because if it isn't affecting them positively in a direct way, it's a kid or someone they love or someone they believe in, who are all benefiting. And so when you were talking about John Powell and this whole idea about the curb cut effect, it's also a spiritual idea that you start with the people who are worse off or who have the least. And by being direct and by helping that and support that, it's the same thing as like, the tide is going to rise
for everyone.
And so if you want to stay in this, what I would call like zero-sum game, it's like a scarcity mindset where if you have, I can't have. What about us all trying to have what we all need? Now, that does mean that some people may need to give up a little something, but it really is going to benefit all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, my last question before we open it up to some juicy questions that I think are coming in the chat. What does a more evolved and inclusive version of meritocracy look like in the modern workplace? Like, I always love to be a little bit forward thinking and, again, sort of try to visualize a reality that we haven't quite gotten to yet. So I'm inviting some, some visioning in this moment for you to share, what does that look like? What does that actually look like?
Okay, here's some visioning words that are part of my book. One is much more curiosity. We think we know, so we don't ask, and therefore we are forever not knowing. Courage. We need to stand up, we need to speak up, and we need to actually have the courage to see this as a time where we can do better and not go under our covers in the morning. I would also say consciousness. We still need a lot of work on so many levels to be conscious of who we are as individuals and also conscious of others who we are needing to collaborate with. And then the other piece is really compassion. We think we're compassionate, but we really only are compassionate to people who we already like or we think deserve compassion. And actually, compassion is something that must be extended to all human beings, not just the ones that you like. And then ultimately community, because none of this gets done without us being in community. So those are vision words. But if I wanted to talk about the work, it's that we've got to do much more than what we thought we were doing. We got to teach people how to interview. We got to teach people what behavioral interviewing even looks like. We've got to actually articulate what the criteria are. We need to stop allowing traditional criteria that already had baked biases and structural impediments in them, and actually start to look for true competencies and capabilities and what they look like and expand where they come from. When we do feedback, or performance evaluations. We need to stop talking about people's personalities. And by the way, when we talk about personalities, it's usually women and people of color who get all the comments about their personalities, whereas other ones
Right.
like, other folks, yeah, you know, he's not that great, but he did a good whatever, whatever. We've
Right.
got to look at our promotions and how we are promoting people. What criteria is it? Like this dark little box that nobody knows what's necessary, and you've got to have a person who sponsors you to get you there? Or are we going to be more open and clear? This work takes attention and intention.
Mm.
And that means there is an investment in the development of humans. That's what we have to do. And that's how we have a more equitable, kind, and promising, effective workplace.
I love that. An investment in the development of humans. I think that sort of summarizes it best. Okay, I'm going to turn to some questions, and I'm terrible at multitasking like this, so bear with me. But there's an interesting, I just think it's come up a couple of times, a new executive order, the newest executive order that's come out, and it says restoring equity of opportunity and meritocracy asserts that U.S. law guarantees equal opportunity, not outcomes, interesting, favoring individual merit over group identity. It claims to eliminate disparate impact liability, arguing it forces race-based decisions and hinders merit-based hiring.
Whatever that means.
A lot of work.
I love how they name the orders because they're just poppycock. I think we already have a law. We have Title VII. It's very clear. I don't know. This is also kind of interesting to me. When you say you're not going to use race as a determining factor or gender, but somehow when you decide who to remove from your pictures and your websites and your graveyard, they're only women and people of color. So aren't you using that as a factor to whitewash our history?
Yeah.
So the hypocrisy of it all is just, it's kind of hard to even imagine that people can say things out of their face like this. But I would need to look at it more, but I do believe that a lot of people think these executive orders are law. And yes, there are things that are being said and said strongly and bullied people into compliance, but we have a law, and that law says that we are all equal and that you cannot use our race and ethnicity and religion and so for age, gender against us. And so I feel like this attempt to remake the law is what is really at stake. People need to wake up and understand that this is what is happening. It is an attempt to steal all of what this hard work has allowed us to do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another question, do you see, and we may have touched on this, but I'm going to read it out loud anyways. Do you see the pendulum swinging back towards diversity, equity, and inclusion anytime soon, with orgs like Target feeling the financial pushback for their stance and many shareholders voting down anti-DEI pushes? Is there a glimmer of hope?
Always hope. You are the hope.
Absolutely.
Everybody on this call is the hope. You know, people often quote Martin Luther King about the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But guess what? You gotta bend it. We all have to bend it. So this whole pendulum thing, take it and pull it back over to where it needs to be. And yeah, there are glimmers of hope everywhere. There have been in the last week in a number of boards that have voted down anti-DEI measures, right? with Target, I believe that they are going to figure it out. I truly hope that they do. And when they do, I hope that we will respond accordingly. But what we are doing is asking for accountability. And that is so important. I also think that we are learning to support each other. So that means that we're going to have to come out of our pockets with money. Like we are going to, one of the things that is very upsetting to me is how companies are almost anticipatorily like complying and taking down their internships, their scholarships, their like all the things, all the pipeline efforts that have made it possible for people like me to be here in this seat. People are pulling away from, and those organizations that were created to sustain the effort are losing money and having to let go staff and may have to close. So we all need to find our glimmer. We need to use our light to create more light. I also think it could be as simple as keeping the connections going at your workplace and not making assumptions about where people are coming from. And even when they're coming from places that you can't really understand, at least finding a way to work collaboratively and respectfully with those individuals.
Yes. The do not obey in advance is an important one to remember. And I was having a conversation with a good friend, Atia Martin, yesterday, and we talked about just how important it is to stick by your values, right? And we know, again, we talked about the DEI work, as it has been called now, has been in effect for decades, arguably at least since the civil rights movement. And so we'll have our setbacks, but we have to keep going forward, right? And I think about in 10 or 20, 30 years, when we look back, you want to be able to say that you were on the right side, you were doing the right thing, you were standing by your values and continuing to bend the arc. So I think being able to just locate yourselves in a bigger spectrum of this work, right? We're definitely experiencing some very real setbacks, and we have to keep moving forward. Absolutely.
I would also say that there are groups that are sustaining big pain right now. Like our trans friends are like, it's so ugly. It's so ugly. And so when we're looking for what to do, like there are things, it doesn't even have to be gigantic. You don't have to like stand on, your soapbox. You can just extend support, connection, yes. To people know that they're visible and that they're cared for. You can learn how to define diversity, equity, inclusion for folks who have gotten it wrong, right? You can write down your elevator pitch. You can figure out what you want to say. You can learn to listen to people and be more curious. All of us can find something to do in this moment to turn the tide back into the space of humanity.
Love that. Here's another question. What if you can't get around rebranding, in quotes, DEI? If lawyers have recommended a rebrand and leadership agrees, but the content remains the same, how can we keep the soul of the work without watering it down because of name/language changes?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I certainly think about it a lot. If you're telling me the work is continuing, then I'm not going to be mad at you. But words have power. That's why we use them. That's why this English language has so many different words. And maybe, we were waging a war of words. And that wasn't as important as the substance. But I don't think they're mad at the word. I really don't. So we can make the changes and they might come for those same words because what they are against is the work. And I know that doesn't answer questions, but people have to do what is best given their situation. But also like somebody took, oh yeah, Harvard just renamed their diversity office as community and something. I forgot what else. That to me is not a good rebrand, but that's my opinion. So it's a tricky question. The lawyers, being a recovering lawyer, I like to respect the lawyers. And I also want you to keep asking your lawyers questions. Because there is, often our breed is risk averse. And I understand that, but sometimes there are moments where risk is worth taking and also worth evaluating, because there's risk on the other side as well.
I agree. And I think that for me, as I've said, the DEI work has been happening before it was called DEI and will continue to happen after it's called DEI. So while words do have power, there is something about this opportunity to continue the work, but reframe it perhaps in a way that is more digestible, right? I think JP Morgan Chase, interestingly enough, as another example, they renamed their DEI program Diversity, Opportunity, and Inclusion, right? And people, when we do talk about equity, we're talking about access and opportunity, right? So building in, I know Lily Zhang is a really popular DEI practitioner, has come out with the FAIR, F-A-I-R acronym, but it's all the same work. It's all going after, access, opportunity, fairness. So, I think it's an interesting time to get creative, but still be committed to the work.
Yeah, my hope is that my hope is that people don't get hoodwinked
Yes.
by what is happening, right?
Yes.
So they start to think that that's changing these words are going to make it different, or that there's something wrong with the words we had initially. So that's just sort of like what's behind it all. And I think that JP Morgan Chase, it's great. And I also think it is a time to redefine and reassess first, right?
Yes.
So it's always good to reassess. You always have stages of diversity work. You should always be checking in,
Yes.
reassess, redefine, reimagine. Yeah, that's what you're speaking about.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm calling them the R's.
I love it. I love it. Equity is a process and a result, right? It's a process and an outcome. So there's always opportunities to keep evolving. How do you handle pushback from staff or leadership not aligned with DEI values? That's come up in a few questions when you're pushback.
Yeah, I think it has to do with what your organization's values are. You always start there, and DEI should be incorporated in those values. And so it's always about values speak, because either we have a set of core values, right, which Jim Collins talks about, James Porras in Built to Last, which is that core values are the things you hold on to even when things get kind of funky. So I think that the work is to figure out how the work of diversity, equity, inclusion is part and parcel of your core values. If it's not, then you have a whole nother discussion that you need to have with people. But I would say point to what is leading the work holistically as an institution, and how diversity, equity, inclusion is helping to achieve outcomes, and not the outcomes that are in the EO, whatever that is, but the outcomes of the organization.
Yeah. This is a good one. What leaders do you turn to advance your own learning, particularly around meritocracy?
What leaders? I don't know if I have leaders. I certainly look at a lot of what people are writing. And I also am using my own lived experience, which has a number of really fabulous men who, because a lot of people think, okay, men can't be great mentors or whatever around merit and about development. And I have to say that when I was coming along, if it wasn't a guy, it was nobody, right? There was nobody, because everybody who was in leadership, for the most part, were men. And so I really grew a lot in my capabilities because there were men and also women, but there were just fewer women.
Yeah.
And I learned a great deal from that. I would also say that the inspiration that I derive right now, especially in this moment, in this time, is mostly my spiritual leaders, because they are the people who are reminding me that that life is always lifing. It's always right. I'm looking at the spring and I'm being reminded of the hope of spring, right? Where it just comes back. It's bare and then all of a sudden it's green, and it is a undeniable force of life that we are always moving ahead and we're always renewing. And so that is sort of the work I think is important as we think about merit. But I also want to say that we have to examine our own notions of merit, like where they come from. Is it like, oh, this person went to this school, or they have these clothes, or they sound this way that makes you think that someone deserves what they have? Or are we digging more deeply into what's underneath of our ideas about merit, which I think is a really important exploration right now.
Love that. My dear friend and colleague, Kelly Bates, in 2016, when we thought we were going through some stuff then, she would always remind us that like the sun still rises every morning, the sun rises, you know, so it's a powerful reminder.
I love Kelly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kelly. Okay, I think we do have to wrap. I also wanted to mention that as you were talking about in some of the questions around how folks are fighting back, one thing we're doing at YW is a new kind of series called Fearless Fridays. And we're highlighting people, individuals, organizations that, you know, that are being fearless, that are really stepping up and continuing the work in spite of the challenges. So that's another resource that folks can look out for. My colleagues are putting a bunch of stuff in the chat. I know there was a question about some of the data that you shared, so we'll try to get all of that together and share that when we close out and send a recording of this. And with that, I'm just going to thank you again. I feel like we could talk forever, but really, really appreciate your time, Vernā. And I think I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Shira, to close us out.
That mute button gets me every time. And Vernā, thank you so much for this conversation. And thank you everyone for your questions and for some of the resources as well that you started to drop in the chat. So if anyone hasn't been looking, please do take a look at that so you can find additional resources for how to advance this. So want to additionally say there were many questions we weren't able to get to this morning. The questions are still important to us, allow us to better understand your needs and provide tailor-made content moving forward. So thank you for those. YW Boston's consulting and training team is here and ready to support you, along with some of the work we're doing with Fearless Fridays and otherwise. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we're dependent on the generosity of people like you to do this work and to push this work forward. So we hope you might consider supporting us and very much appreciate that. And with that, I hope everyone gets outside, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Abba.
Thank you, Vernā.